set out to annihilate the Jewish people. They nearly succeeded. They killed 6 million in Europe. They committed atrocities that cannot be believed, even by those who somehow survived. While the Jews of Europe were herded into cattle cars and deported to concentration camps, only to suffer pain, hunger, degradation, and extermination, the Jews in the United States, who were there only by the grace of God, were living life as usual, were going to parties and enjoying the luxuries of their lives. Most Jews were oblivious to what was happening in Europe. The contrast of the lives of the Jews of Europe and those living in America in the early 1940s is startling.
Survivors the night of November 9th were awakened by loud shouting and banging on our door. We already knew what the Nazis were doing to the Jews in our city, but I'm a lawyer and thought they wouldn't touch me. I was wrong. My wife followed me to the door and started pleading with the Nazis to leave us alone. Of course, they pushed us aside and started to run through the house, smashing everything in sight. All our beautiful crystal was smashed into shards and were spread all over the floor. Our lamps, our expensive furniture, just about everything in their sight was either torn or broken. When they approached my wife's Steinway piano, she started to yell, "No, no, not my piano." Of course, they didn't care and proceeded to chop the piano with an axe. My wife was hysterical. Our girls were standing on the stairway, clutching each other and crying. And I, the head of the household, was helpless. When these animals finished their work, they beat me and dragged me away. I had no idea where they were taking me. A few days later, I found myself in Dachau concentration camp. I found out later that November 9th and 10th were labeled the Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass.
When I got up on the morning of November 10, I turned on the radio and started to make my coffee as I do every morning. After the weather forecast and local news, I heard something about a riot in Germany. I knew the Nazis were attacking the Jews in Germany, but I never thought they'd go so far as to destroy Jewish property and arrest some Jewish men for no other reason than that they were of the Jewish faith. I'm grateful that my parents came to America at the turn of the 20th century. Jerry, my 6-year-old son, was up a few times during the night. I hoped he wasn't sick, that it was just bad dreams. In the event that he was sick, I'd have to make arrangements for someone to stay with him while I have my hair done. If I don't keep my appointments, Anthony has a fit, and I'll look like a wreck all the next week. It was raining that day, which further complicated my life. If Jerry went to school, I'd have to drive him, which would make me late for my hair appointment. I've had to start thinking about what to make for dinner that night. It's still impossible to please everyone. Maybe I'll scrap the idea of making dinner tonight. We'll just eat out. I've got to remember to make a reservation. Before Jerry gets up, I've got to call my mother and ask her if she can stay with Jerry in the event that he's too sick to go to school. To top it all off, I have an important PTA meeting this afternoon. I feel so stressed out.
It was a warm, late September day in 1942. All the Jews had already been herded into the school and were forced to live like animals for 4 weeks. The Nazis kept bringing more and more people into the school, making life more miserable and crowded, with people dying from contagious diseases. It was a horrible mess. Then, one morning, they gave us 5 minutes to dress and line up in the schoolyard. They took us to the train station in trucks and confiscated all our possessions, and they hustled us into boxcars. I was still with my mother and sister and her 2 children, but I don't know how many days we were on that train. I do know it was days and days. Anytime they stopped the train, the Germans came on and they looked us over. We were all wearing yellow stars. We had no food and we had no water, and we had just one bucket to relieve ourselves. The stench was the worst that I have ever experienced. Babies were crying, mothers were crying, people were shouting and sobbing, and then some of the men were praying at the top of their voices. I don't know how I survived this nightmare. Our last stop was Auschwitz. When the door opened, all I could see were bright lights, wicked-looking Nazi soldiers yelling, "Mach, schnell!" and huge dogs barking and ready to attack anyone that their master ordered them to attack. They unloaded us, and there was the famous Dr. Mengele shouting, "Left, right, left, right." Mothers ran after their children, children ran after their parents, and I was running after my parents when Dr. Mengele grabbed me. And he said, "You there, fatty, you can go to work. You're young enough." 3 times I ran to be with my parents, and 3 times he threw me back. My sister was still with me, but my mother was forced into a different line. My sister held on to her children, but those monsters took them away from her, and I can still hear her loud sobs and yelling, "Take me too, take me too." And then they shot her. I never saw my parents again.
It was a lovely day in late September 1942. The chestnut trees were in full bloom, and the ground was covered with plump brown chestnuts. It was Sukkot, and a few of our neighbors were putting up the sukkahs. It was quiet on the street. I could hear the cheers of the high school kids from the school down the block, urging the team on to victory. We were winning, and everyone was hollering. My sister's 2 daughters were cheerleaders. I could swear I heard their shouting. My mother, my sister, and I were in the kitchen, baking for the holiday, and preparing a feast fit for a king. We have to do without brisket this year, because we used all our September ration stamps for Rosh Hashanah. Oh well, chicken would have to do. But I had a delicious new chicken recipe that I was dying to try. No one would starve, that was for sure. We were sure to have a joyous sukkah. My father would take the kids to shul in the morning so they could march around with the lulav and the etrog.
In August 1943, my wife and I, along with her sister and brother-in-law, were hiding in the basement. My wife held our baby so tightly, it's a wonder he could breathe. When we came out, I ran down the hill to the hospital. I heard that the nurses there took Jewish children and cared for them. I wanted to bring my baby to safety before he was taken to the last transport. Just as I arrived at the hospital, a truck came in front of me, and the soldiers threw me on and pulled the baby away from me. I can't forget that moment.
I was dragged off to Buchenwald and Auschwitz. I dug ditches in the cold without warm clothing, without shoes, knowing that I'd freeze to death if I stopped for a minute. Whenever I went through, and with all the miserable things still bleeding within me, the biggest loss in my life was when they took that baby from me, that crying baby, so low.
It was a hot day in August 1943. The children were so uncomfortable that I decided to take them to the beach to cool off in the water. We have to take the bus because I couldn't use up my gas ration stamps for such pleasures. I packed a lovely lunch. God forbid anyone should go hungry. We were going to spend a pleasant day in the sun and in the water. The children had a wonderful time splashing around in the water and building castles in the sand. I remember getting nervous because my eldest went out a little too far, and he wasn't such a good swimmer. The kids devoured their sandwiches. Their cheeks were aglow with sunburn, and they looked so healthy and so happy. As a special treat, before we left, we took a ride on the merry-go-round. The day was so much fun, and we were so happy. When we got home, I discovered that my neighbor's son was killed in action in the Pacific. She never stopped crying. I wish I could have done something to help her. What a tragedy. Such a nice young man of 21. His life cut short and his mother's heart broken. She hung a gold star in her window.
I'm a survivor.
It was a bitter cold that day in January 1944 when we arrived at Auschwitz. The doors of the boxcar opened and men in striped uniforms came in. They spoke Yiddish, so we thought that they had come to save us. These men told us to leave our belongings on the train and get out. When we got out of the train, we were lined up and German officers were telling us where to go, to the left or to the right. Men and women were separated. I was with my cousin and was separated from the rest of the family. Then we were somewhere in a line and there were men working on the side of the road, digging ditches and begging for food. The officers put us in a barracks and we were ordered to undress entirely. We were only allowed to keep our shoes, but they took out the laces. Imagine women and girls from our sheltered area and from Orthodox homes, how it felt to undress in front of these German officers and soldiers. We did as we were told, and then we were taken to another room where our hair was cut off on all parts of our body. From there we went to another room where we got some sort of a solution. After that, we were thrown into a shower room. I found out later that I was among the few lucky ones because water came out, not gas. After our shower, we were thrown a dress and came out, and we had to put it on. It was bitter cold and windy. We didn't even have underwear, only that dress. After what seemed like hours of waiting, we were taken to another barracks. There were 3 layers of bunks made of rough wood, just boards, not even close together. There were no blankets, no pillows. We were told to lie down on those rough boards. Later, we were handed a piece of bread that was like black mud. There was a little margarine on the bread, and also we were given some warm fluid that was called coffee. The crying and shouting that night was like something out of a horror movie, something I have never heard before. It went on for days and days. Imagine the pain. We were torn from our families. We were cold, we were hungry, and we were terrified. We didn't know where we were or what would happen.
There was a lot of snow and cold in January of 1944. It seemed like the war would never end, and practically all our young men were in the service. We girls had to do things together to keep from being bored. We saw a lot of movies. I didn't like all those war films, as I said. Didn't like all those war films. Too depressing. But Jimmy Stewart was sure handsome in a uniform. The big musicals were my favorites. I loved to see Gene Kelly dance. Sometimes we go to the USO and dance or just chat with the soldiers and sailors who happen to be in town. I read in the paper that President Roosevelt has formed the War Refugee Board for the rescue, transportation, maintenance, and relief of the victims of enemy oppression. He is establishing havens of temporary refuge for such victims. My mother and father were excited. Mama's sister and her family, who lived in Hungary, hadn't been heard from in a very long time. Mama felt that for sure they'd be saved, and that my parents could sponsor them to come to America. She had been saving her money for a long time so that she could help her family when they got here.
Was April 1945 that a German medic came to my compound and announced that everyone who wanted to take a shower could do so. I hadn't had a shower since March 1944. That's a long time between showers. Well, I went to the shower. The water was ice cold. There were no towels, no soap. But even so, for me, it was a spark of light in a very dark world. That April, people were falling like flies from hunger, from typhoid. The British were only 8 miles from our camp. 4,800 of us were marched to another camp in a suburb of Prague. The days that followed were complete chaos. The Free French were within miles of us. Luckily, we ran into British patrols. The sky was full of airplanes, and bombs. This went on until we ran into the 9th American Army. Before that, we were padlocked in boxcars. The Americans shot off the padlocks, and when the doors opened, they were stunned by the dead bodies that fell out on them. The mess officers organized a team of American tanks and went to the neighboring German villages and at gunpoint ordered every mayor to start cooking and bring the food from every household to feed the liberated prisoners. But the mess officer meant well. When I weighed in at the Army Field Hospital, I was all of 64 pounds, not to mention the lice.
In April 1945, our leader, our mentor, our demagogue, Franklin Delano Roosevelt died. It was a warm, beautiful spring day when the radio announced the passing of our president. Everyone cried and mourned. My mother cried hysterically. She mourned Roosevelt, but was worried sick over the fate of my brother, friending somewhere in Germany. He had been gone for 3 years, and most of it overseas. Only God knew where. With Roosevelt gone, what would happen? News was good from Europe. It seemed the war would be over any day. Would things change now that Harry Truman was president? Because the president died, Mother canceled her bridge club that night. Somehow, it didn't seem right to be playing cards the night our president died.
Two worlds, an ocean apart, but they might have been two different planets for the Jews. Over half of the Jewish population of the world had been destroyed. A world, a culture had been obliterated. It was, and still is, the responsibility of those of us who are left to be sure the horrors of the Holocaust are not forgotten. It is a legacy left to us by the 6 million who perished. With the rise of anti-Semitism today, it is incumbent upon us Jews to be even more diligent and more proactive to curb the evil of anti-Semitism. I just want to mention, this is a chai, which means life.
Use the mic.
Pick it up. Survivor of the Holocaust, Irving Simon,
Use the mic.
made this for me.
Use the mic.
Oh. It's a chai, which means life, and survivor of the Holocaust, Irving Simon, a blessed memory, made this for me in appreciation for everything that I had done for the survivors. Does anybody have anything that they want to add or question, or very happy to answer anything, or? No? Okay, so Enid.
Give me the mic.
I remember we were sharing this at dinner tonight. one of the things you'll always remember probably is where you were, if you were alive, when President Roosevelt died. Where you were when the war ended. First in Europe, I think, and then in the Pacific. I think we should talk about some of those things and also try to remember some of the things that when we were children that were going on in the United States, as well as the wonderful, wonderful, let's hear it for Phyllis, the wonderful program she put together.
Anybody else have anything they want to say? Where you were the day that this? Okay. Louise?
Yeah, I just want, well, you can probably hear me. I just want to acknowledge all of you. This presentation was so moving, so heartfelt. Phyllis, I think you should take this, bring it to schools out there, bring it to the community who may not really have an understanding or know what this was all about and how much was sacrificed. Acknowledge all of you, especially you.
Anyone else?
No, I don't think that.
You put your hand up.
Just be quick. You know, if my history serves me correctly, we really didn't know until it was much later what was happening in Germany. However, there is a country in this world who's vowed to destroy Jews and annihilate Israel with nuclear bombs. That's Iran. And I just don't understand why more Jews in the United States aren't concerned about that.
Unfortunately, history repeats itself. And Marshall?
I don't think we should be too kind to ourselves. We could have known if we chose to. There was news in the paper, we ignored it. We wanted to go on with our pleasant life. We should not take too much pride in the fact that we did not know. We just chose not to know.
That's very true. In the press during the war, anything that came out about the Holocaust, or there was no such a word as Holocaust at that time, but anything that was happening in Europe was always hidden on the back pages of the newspapers. So most people didn't even read them.
Phyllis, in response to Gary. Who's Gary?
Isn't your name Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi Gary. In response to what your comment about Iran, and I will stand corrected because I'm not sure if I'm right, but I believe it's because Iran has nuclear weapons, and we walk on eggs with any country that has nuclear weapons and is capable of using them.
Don't forget Madison Square Garden had a huge rally that was led by Rabbi Stephen Wise, who kind of, he tried to warn everyone, and there were many people in attendance, and so we did know, yet, as Marshall said, our life in America was one we wanted to protect. I remember I was about 6 or so and accompanied my father to the movies, and we watched a newsreel which was extremely inclusive of all of the horrors going on in Germany. And as we walked out, my father said to me, "That can't really be the news, because human beings don't do that to other human beings." And that was the opinion that he held then, before we knew better.
Anybody else? Well, I want to thank these wonderful friends of mine who participated in this and were very kind to agree and attend the rehearsal, so kindly stand up and. Thank you again for coming. And we must be diligent about anti-Semitism because it can happen here if we are not careful and stand up for ourselves. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
Appreciate this kind of public education for those of us who are not very familiar with the fact of Holocaust and so on. I hope that tonight everybody's presentation plus the chairwoman's, if you could print this 11-12 pages of all the people spoke and made them into one volume that we are able to get it and read them carefully. I would appreciate that. I think that we could have some time to think about this problem.
I was saying
You can leave some copies in the
I would
library.
like to, I agree with him. I would like to see this published, and perhaps the Federation would publish it. If you put it together, I would like to push for it.
Thank you.
This would be a great tool for education in high school, or perhaps a junior high school, and put through high at the Federation, they might be able to use your writing of this message at the schools, as
Well, survivors of the Holocaust, when they were able, went to the schools and talked about their stories. However, now, unfortunately, there aren't too many left, and some of their children are taking over for them and going into the schools and talking about it. So, and I know there's a lot of controversy about President Roosevelt and how he handled the whole thing with not letting Jews into the country. With the quota, there was the whole thing with the St. Louis ship that he sent back, and the people who were not lucky enough to go to England all ended up in concentration camps and passed away. But he did manage to save 1,000 or close to 1,000 Jews and establish a haven in Oswego. It's called Safe Haven, and it has really developed into quite a thing. They've expanded it. There's a wonderful museum there, which tells about these Jews. Most of them were from Italy or Yugoslavia, that area, who came in August of 1944. And when they arrived, when they got off the train, they saw barbed wire, and they thought, oh, here we go again. We're gonna be incarcerated again. But they were surprised with the warm welcome that they received and the food that was plentiful and put before them. Their living conditions weren't the best, but they were much better than what they had. There was kind of barracks kind of living. Roosevelt had said that once the war is over, these people had to sign an affidavit that they would go back to Europe and to their former homes. Well, they didn't have a home anymore. They didn't know what to do. And Truman, God bless him, because these people could not get into the United States, went to the United States from Oswego. They took them to Niagara Falls, and they crossed the Rainbow Bridge at Niagara Falls and were able to stay in the United States. And many of them had created a wonderful life for themselves. So that's a little bit of good news.
Okay, I want to say first how happy I was to be able to participate. It was a real honor to do that. The second is I wanted to ask you how you put this all together and how long it took. And I know your scenes from the American part were just, you knew, but how did you research the Holocaust scenes? And that was my question.
I worked very closely with Holocaust survivors, and they told me their stories, and that's how I knew. Plus, there's a lot of literature that I had read about what happened, so I kind of put it all together, and it's...
Take a long time.
I don't remember.
You've been writing it all your life.
Yeah. When I get an idea, it just goes. Yes.
Thank you. Getting back to Oswego, my late husband was in summer school there for a short time. And he was very curious about the folks from Germany. So he found a hole in the fence and he climbed in and he got to talking to some of them in Yiddish. And that was so meaningful to him. Also, my first husband, Gil, started his teaching career near Oswego. And we lived there for 2 years. And the principal, whose name I've forgotten, was very, very kind to the kids and let them come there for class. And he was really somewhat of a hero. And my husband used to drive his wife to school. It was about 10 miles from Oswego. So we have very vivid memories of the town of Oswego.
A couple of years ago, a couple contacted me who had lived in Oswego during the war, and they had a very interesting story. They spoke around town they spoke here, I think, and they spoke at the Federation, and it was very, very interesting to hear what their life was like. They ended up living in Minneapolis. Anybody else?
I want to say something about my hero, Eleanor Roosevelt. She actually did Eleanor Roosevelt, and correct me if you have other information. She actually pressed her husband on this, and she was instrumental and understood what was going on, and that we weren't, the U.S. was not treating the distressed immigrants the way they should have. And as I said, I think at dinner tonight, Truman isn't given enough credit because Truman really helped a tremendous amount after the war.
The blame has been put on Roosevelt. However, there is another side to that story. It wasn't only Roosevelt, it was more the State Department
Yes.
that was very anti-Semitic and made all the rules that the Jews could not come into America. The ambassador to Germany at the time, before the war, saw what was coming, and he telegraphed the State Department constantly, telling them that they've got to do something, and they never answered him. They ignored the whole thing. So Roosevelt's reasons for not bombing Auschwitz was that he felt if he bombed Auschwitz, more people would be killed than if he didn't. That was his reasoning about it. So, okay, well, thank you.